from, I guess, the future talking to you in VR. Um, my name is James Chan, and today I guess we'll be talking about technology and learning. More specifically, the online learning format. How can we rethink our approach to teaching so that it can better fit the needs of students and prepare them to become more
Yeah.
adaptable
Mm.
to the changes in the future?
Thanks.
Um, and I'm coming from this as, I guess, fellow pedagogue trying to convince you guys that we should be looking at early educational models of learning through play and how that can fit with new possibilities in the digital age. Often these new possibilities and new ways of thinking of where and how we teach things gets overlooked by conventional banking methods of teaching with maybe a new technological twist. It is also the case that we relegate this playful ingenuity and resolve to the innocence of children. We think that because kids have not been worn down by the nuances of life, or that they have not been socialized to our boring lives, that they find joy and playfulness until we, the adults, beat it out of them through routine and torture. But I think otherwise. It is because children are forced to live in a world that is not designed for them, right? They're much smaller than most adults. So, and that they're not in control, so they're constantly trying to adapt to maybe how to get stuff from like a taller thing, right? And they're adapting and compromising to the environment, and that's not clearly designed for them. And I think there's a beauty and wisdom in the ability to find joy in adapting to these to anything they do. And we probably would need this kind of ability in the upcoming decades. In a way, as adults, we are also not in control of our lives. So why wouldn't we try to exert that kind of playful, joyous wisdom in our lives either? Way too often, teachers who think they're in control and know everything, uh, and that because the web and the computer can deliver information really fast to a student, that they give us copious amounts of PDFs, readings, and all that, in the hopes that the students will learn from that. That way of teaching might work well with an AI, but is that really the right way to teach a human being? Um, and I don't think that is. In fact, I think that would only lead us to be replaced by robots in the future. Instead, I think educators should not be delivering information to the students. I think we should be doing the exact opposite. Let the students explore on their own, right, of how to get information and then deliver the information maybe back to us. That might be a much better method of information delivery. And in that way, the students can create their own discourse around the interests of their of whatever interests that they like. We need a more student-centered classroom, basically letting them play more. And what is this play? What play is when we take something that is not designed for us, right, and make it to serve our needs and concerns. Augment it, treat it, design it however we do. Play is not doing what we want, but doing what we can with the materials that we find along the way. And fun is not derived from play. So fun is not from play, right? Oops, sorry, it's a bit wonky. Right. I think fun is not derived merely from play, but it is from tinkering from a part of the world that's not meant for us and serving our needs. So fun is derived from making something that's not for us, basically design it to fit our needs, right? And that's kind of the basic concept of rebellion kindergarten. Of course, I didn't come up with this idea on my own. This educational model has existed long before I have existed. In fact, it's also deeply rooted in architectural education and history, but I think we might have walked away from it since. So the earliest accounts of this education actually comes from this dude over here, right? So this man, Friedrich Froebel, but I don't think he's as important as his educational toys and inventions, the invention of the kindergarten. In particular, its relationship to play and how, through a configuration of ordinary blocks, through a configuration of ordinary blocks can lead to infinite amounts of possible play outcomes, right? And playful outcomes. As a result, this leads me to think that play could be made, anything could be made to play, and we could play with anything while being productive. Perhaps play may seem unserious, trivial, until you realize that the playful mentality requires more attention and investment than our supposedly serious and typical ways of learning. For example, if I were to have a guitar, right? This may look more like a banjo, but just pretend it's a guitar. It's right. Um, if I were to play the guitar, I have to focus on the specific strings or how to strum this guitar, right? Even if I don't know how to play it, I have to know exactly how to hold it and maybe role play a guitarist, right? That's still a type of play. But it takes a lot of attention and detail to that. And and I think it is the biggest reason on why I think we need to revisit play in the 21st century. Ultimately, it really is about how we thrive and flourish in a world that's designed to kill us, or at least, at the very least, indifferent to our needs and wants, and how to design it to fit our needs and wants. Speaking of death, in fact, it wasn't until 1870s, roughly 20 years after Friedrich's death, that his invention of the kindergarten gained notoriety, in part through the American educator Elizabeth Peabody and her 1870s paper, A Plea for Rebellion Kindergarten as the First Grade of Primary Art Education, in which she wrote, "For it employs the prodigious but originally blind activity and easily trained the hands of childhood from the age of 3 in intelligent production of things within the childish sphere of affection and fancy, giving thereby a harmonious play of heart and mind, and actively educating without straining the brain, even to the point of developing invention, while it keeps the tempered sweet and spirit's joys with pleasure of success. Childish play has all the main characteristics of art, inasmuch as it is the endeavor to conform to the outward show of things to be, the desire of mind. Every child at play is histotonic and plastic. He impersonates characters with mimic gestures and costume, and represents whatever fancy interests him by embodiment of it. Perhaps in mud or in a row of footstools and chairs, which becomes a railroad train to him at his own sweet will. Basically, what she is saying is that because the abstract nature of the toys and the freedom that the educational model allows for, the students were able to practice abstraction and invention in multiple different ways. For example, a set of blocks may be used for counting, right? One, two, and three, could then be used to build a house, right? It's a really bad looking house, but then could be used to build a house. And then maybe through that, animate a story to tell, right, about it. So through a set of blocks, you have a mathematical play of it. You have one that builds maybe an architectural model and something that does a film. Maybe it kind of, in the end, produces film. Right. So a student learns to model the world in fundamentally different ways while using a set of tools. Oops. Fun- Rearranging the tools and rigging it to fit their needs. So it doesn't really need to be a perfect tool. It is no surprise then that Froebel's influence on building forms and movement games became the source of inspiration for abstract art. Modernists and the Bauhaus. Expressionist, Cubist, and Surrealist artists like Paul Klee and Kandinsky attended early kindergarten. Others like Pierre Mondrian then encountered Froebelian methods as a teacher. The resemblance of much of their work to the illustration of a kindergarten teaching guides is uncanny at times. In some cases, a person might be hard pressed to guess whether a given work was created by a kindergarten student or an abstract artist. For example, Gifts 6 and 18 most likely influenced and probably developed Wright's way of thinking and building as he designs in kindergarten. Or how Gift 10 then influenced maybe Le Corbusier. Or how Gift 19 has allowed Bucky Fuller to manually discover the power of triangles and build his very first space frame at a kindergarten. Then this leads me to question what kinds of inventions or designs would the designers of tomorrow create if they grew up playing video games such as these? Would we expect them to have the same kind of affiliation to the physical world and physical objects as children who grew up playing for Belgian gifts? I think the digital is a new physical for this generation. They are learning to play with spatiality, geometry in the digital form rather than the physical. We have allowed corporations to take over this digital aspect of teaching in which they created perfect games that users cannot get under the hood of, with exception to maybe Minecraft, VR chat, and Roblox. But these are far and few in between. It is our goal as an educator to support and create more of those games, tools so that we can create better fitting learning environments for these designers of the future. While many, to many, the Froebelian kindergarten might be restricting individuality, and the kindergarten, quote unquote, occupations created by it enforces this way of thinking. Children maybe specializing in perforation, sewing, drawing, weaving, folding, cutting, model making, and so forth. However, it is the exact opposite. The Froebelian kindergarten is about giving children the choice to use these tools. In using all these tools, the students are given every encounter to act creatively. The individuality of each child is important, and their choice of activity is respected with the hopes of discovering and developing distinct traits. We can see that Gropius, in conceptualizing the Bauhaus, must have taken inspiration and aspiration to model the diagram of the Bauhaus to maybe a kindergarten model. Often the diagram gets misunderstood as restrictive as well. However, I think this diagram is doing the exact opposite. And it is way ahead of its time in thinking. At least the outer edges, right? Sorry, I don't know what my pen is. At least I think this is correct, the outer edges. The preliminary courses and the basic form studies is revolutionary because instead of having a master teaching you about the properties of wood or apprenticing to learn about color or clay, students are learning about composition and experimenting with working with different forms and materials. Students do not learn about material properties via a master to student translation, but experimenting with them and understanding the idea, form, and material is all connected. No longer is design locked to a certain material. It is about the relationship and understanding between these new and old materials. No longer is is it the carpenter, the mason, the blacksmith, but the designer fits all those roles because there is probably something fundamental or abstract processes that connects them all, right? Although it may seem quite familiar to us today, but it was radical when compared to maybe the Beaux-Arts, which was still doing drawings and more drawings. And afterwards, if they're lucky, specializing under the tutelage of a master. In fact, I think we're closer to the Beaux-Arts method today with all the focus being on the final review, right? And if we look at this picture here, here's the review, here is maybe the crowd, right? And over here, maybe you have the reviewers, Peter Testa, Peter Trummer, Jackie Bloom, over here, Neil Denari's over here. I think that's, I don't know who that is actually. But you can't really find, but you know what's missing in this picture? You can't really see who the presenter is. And all the focus is on the review and perhaps the masters, quote unquote, or the professors discussing it. Like I can't even find the student who is presenting. Well, I actually know, but it's actually these two over here. But I think we need to rethink how we teach. If it only ends up in a spectacle where the professors do not discuss with the students that did the work, but only about the work itself or the processes of the work. Right. Whoops. Gotta clean that up. Now let's shift gears and talk about why it is so important to have a kindergarten playful style of education at a university in 2020. I could tell you that the future students will be born in the post-information age, or they will be submerged and connected to the digital in a way that we cannot even imagine, or the world is changing so fast that new technologies or softwares are coming out every week, or that the students need to adapt to these changes, or companies have become bigger and bigger over the years, and how do we avoid preparing students to become a slave to the workforce? And I think these are all great reasons, but there is one simple answer. There is one of the most simplest answer, which is that we should be teaching people, like humans, and not robots. We should have fun and joy while learning. And education is not this boring, monogamous thing that we do in our lives, but education is an invitation to play, playing being a way of tinkering or investigating a part of the world. I think this would have improved my learning experience personally, and I think that it's not too late for my kids or their generation to have that kind of education. This specific type of play is really hard to do. I think kids are better at doing this because they do not have this selfish, egotistical view of the world that perhaps most adults do. They are more accepting to change and maybe they're willing to try things out differently just because they can. Let's examine how Gift 19 played a role in Fuller's fascination and exploration of the space frame and tensegrity, for example. What initially started off as a set of peas and toothpicks led to Fuller's discovery of the space frame. As a kindergartner, the framework gift is initially just a game to let children better understand the relationship between line and vertices. However, through playing and expected discoveries, Fuller realized the power of the triangles. The more triangles that he had, the stronger the structure was. Fuller once said in an interview that he discovered the strength of an object uh, or build is proportional to the number of triangles as a kid working on these things on his kindergarten table. And it was not. It was only possible because of the Froebelian gift allowed such DIY freedom and allowed Fuller to build slash rig whatever shape he wanted. It is through this freedom that Fuller was probably able to experiment with strings and test various properties and certain geometric arrangements. And it was not a surprise then that the person who was interested in these framework games became the first person to coin the term tensegrity. We can see how a game that is focused around 2D images and 3D object creation could have allowed Ben Fuller to have a life of design and innovation. Much of his work is not that different from the game he played as a child in principle, right? Although the final product may have been different, but the principles and the DIY attitude of the game must have been ingrained into him. And maybe that's how Half Life had done the same thing to my generation. Whether it is Fuller or Wright, I think this DIY attitude has been deeply ingrained in our American culture and society as well. Our interest of hot rods and Harleys did not come from left field. Let's just take a look at some of our great companies, right? Well, most of them have started from a garage or a shed of sort. Harley Davidson, for example, Disney, Apple, HP, Amazon, Microsoft, Google. We cannot deny the fact that the American garage has been an incubator for American success stories, or that there has been striking similarities between the garage and the Froebelian playset. Although the parts and the tools of the garage that 100% fit the needs that one uses over time through tinkering and altering the altering it, they were able to slowly uh, mold it into different viable tool sets. However, I think that the garage of my generation is digital in the forms of a video game. At least its ideals is embedded into the games like Half-Life. Game, the games themselves are the cars. The engines in which the games run on is like the constructs of the garage itself, and we, the users, become the modifiers of these machines or mods, and so forth. And where does Half Life come into all of this? Well, here is some background on Half Life. Half Life was created by Valve, which is a gaming company founded by Gabe Newell, who before then worked for Microsoft. Valve is an experiment in itself, trying to figure out how to use PC to game. Over the years, Valve have become the pioneer and contributed to a lot to the gaming environment or the gaming industry of what we know today. Most of the tools that have been developed by Valve, like the Source Engine and Steam, have been open to the public for use. This open, hands-off approach to their software has allowed the modern community and indie developers to develop. with passion, developed by the love for the game and the freedom to use the tools that develop the game. Many great mods were born from Half-Life series, Counter-Strike being one of them. Valve, of course, took notice and bought the intellectual properties to Counter-Strike and the whole modding team of it. This actually solidified the existence of a whole new industry at that time, which is the modding industry. We have to understand that these modders were not your college graduates, but 16-year-olds who have developed a passion for Half Life and maybe wanted to do a custom game mode that would suit their needs or for their friends. Through playing and tinkering around, sorry, through playing and tinkering around with the Source engine, they were able to create this iconic multi-billion-dollar cash cow called Counter-Strike, right? And incredible mods like Defense of the Ancients from World of Warcraft 3 was also developed and sold at that time, which then became Dota 2 and influenced games like League of Legends, which then have brought a whole esports industry with them. Gaming went from a garage industry where I play on a Sega or a Nintendo to with my friends to a worldwide phenomenon when where you're playing for millions of viewers around the world. It is it is rivaling conventional sports for viewerships now. This is not this is only possible because one, we transitioned from console to PC, thanks to Valve, and two, because we have the freedom to play and tinker with the tools of the game, which ultimately led to the modern community and totally different series of games were born from the original. Right, of course, this does not only affect the modders, but the developers and the whole industry of players making cosmetics, player-made cosmetics made by talented artists who are also passionate about improving the quality of the game that they love. By simply moving video games from the console to the PC and embracing the modding community and supporting it with tools, Valve have not only created a whole new industry, but jobs and livelihoods for many young artists and developers. Even ordinary players like me have benefited from this. So this is a story back in 2014 when I was in high school, and my friends and I were really into Counter Strike, and I still am. But around this time, when this around this time is when skins and player-made cosmetics industry took off. We, like most eager high school students, were theorizing about the potential that this could be another stock market. So we implemented investment strategies and wagered a bet with one another on who can gain the most expensive inventory by the time of our high school reunion, which is in 2 years. I'm currently in third place. We all started off with 250 Canadian. Throughout the 5 years of undergrad at SCIARC, I was able to get my inventory up to 25,000 American. In fact, this year, because of the virus, I was able to double my inventory to 50,000. Um, I am not saying that you should be like me and become a skin investor or that 50,000 is a lot. But what I am saying is that through playing with Steam Market and over the years, I have learned about supply and demand. I have learned the buy and sell cycles, and that's given me the confidence to manage my own portfolio and assets in the real world. In fact, I find it quite fun. Um, and this is a very personal example of how playing has taught me and led me to some useful knowledge. By simply moving video games from consoles to PC, Valve actually have sparked the creation of $160 billion industry of play at 2020. with an estimated 10% growth year over year, while the construction industry has been on a 4 to 5% decline in these few years. I think we have to think very carefully about which industry and environment we're going to put our trained architects and designers in. Just imagine what kind of industry would blossom out of simply putting design education inside a playful video game environment. What kind of awesome mods and user created content would the students of these schools bring to the table? I think the possibility of learning is endless if we allow the students to play around with their own education. I think at the very least, we would create more strong-minded and adaptable students. And I think we need that in the next time, in the coming years. And I would say that through play, I was able to make all of this, right? For example, let me do this. For example, this button over here, I could tell you that I used maybe 20 lines of code to create so that I can have created this, right, which was a virtual PowerPoint, or that this whole environment was all possible because of VR chat and its open source and kind of the Unity engine, or that maybe you can do something like this and sorry, and allow kind of students to build their own engines in which they build buildings, right? So that's kind of what I've been talking about, or that's kind of what